Step into the world of success with your brand amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success. I don't know when you sleep, Joe Quattrone. You do so many different things. You're involved in so many different industries and areas, and I'm really excited to dive into them with you.
Yeah.
Let's start with your background, and I will tell you a funny story about Audi. In the late 90s, I worked for Kevin Berg and Associates in Chicago, and I would call people who filled out the little cards, Audi dealerships, to do a test drive, because, of course, we were not in the throes fully of digital at that point. But you are somebody who brought them into the digital space as one of the first brands who really understood how to implement. So thank you for being here. And
you're welcome.
Take us back a little bit before we get to all of the exciting things that you're up to today.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. And second of all, the sleep thing is real. I also have 4 kids. So I try to sneak some time in there every once in a while, but it's hard. Dating back to my time in Audi, this was about 17, 18 years ago-ish. Interestingly enough, it was also a political season. It was the year Barack Obama first ran and became president of the United States. Oh. I had just got out of grad school in 2008, and I started working at Audi of America. I was actually working for a company called Venables Bell & Partners, their creative agency, but in the automotive industry, they staff their employees at the car company.
Wow.
So that's kind of how I got my start. And I sat about 40 feet away from the CMO at the time. His name was Scott Keogh. And I think he just looked out on the floor and saw this guy that was in his 20s. And bear in mind, I'm in my late 20s at this point. I just looked young. I didn't have this beard or anything like that. So I probably looked like I was 22. And he just said, "Hey, you come here," essentially. I went into his office and he said, "Hey," he threw an article from the New York Times down on his desk. And it was about how Barack Obama was using Facebook groups to become, what we all assumed was going to be the president at the time. He hadn't won at the time, but he was using Facebook groups pretty effectively. And Scott's insight was, hey, if this guy can use Facebook groups to become the leader of the free world, I wonder if we can sell cars. And so for the next 6 months, I was doing research projects for him on how we could actually enter into the market. Eventually got serious. He liked the research and he wanted me to put together a go-to-market plan, which we eventually took to the Germans. The folks from Audi AG were in town at the New York Auto Show, and Scott pitched them a lot of my work. And, well, I would say mine, but it was me and a team of interns that I assembled. And they bought it. And we were able to, get a team off the ground, hire an agency, and put a social media practice into the marketplace. We were one of the first, I'd say, dozen brands in the country that were doing it at that scale. And one of the very first in automotive, maybe even the first. I think Ford might have beat us to it, but yeah.
Amazing. Well, can you talk a little bit about the transition from agency to in-house so that people who might be looking at roles, because I have a lot of students who listen to the podcast as well, grad students, I'd love for them to understand the differentiators in each role, each side.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very interesting. I think there's a big cultural aspect to it. So I've worked at agencies and I've worked in client in-house roles. Typically, at least in my experience, client roles tend to be a little bit more buttoned up. They tend to be a little more suburban, and the population of the employees tend to be a little older, whereas agencies tend to gravitate towards urban centers. They tend to be a little bit younger. They tend to follow trends and do trend hunting a little bit more. So most of the time when I've worked at agencies in my lifetime, it's been in places like New York and Los Angeles, whereas when I've spent time in client offices, it's been in the suburbs. And or even when I've been, I'd say save maybe like a 6-year span when I was in New York and I was working on AB InBev. That client was in my backyard in Manhattan, but for the most part, outside of that, every time I would travel to a client, even, it would be predominantly in the suburbs.
Yeah.
So FYI, it's just a different lifestyle change. I think what happens when people, when they come out of school, they want to go pursue the cool thing at the time, which is living in a certain area, and agency jobs are right there for you. We're waiting to pluck that talent up. But then as you age up and you start having kids and stuff like that, your desires become a little bit more, for stability and stuff like that. So you go after buying a house and living a different lifestyle and all that stuff. So it makes sense why people would start at agencies and go to clients eventually.
Definitely. And I also noticed you have a lot of experience in automotive, beverage, how did that shape your career? Did you find yourself being pigeonholed into those verticals, or were you able to expand beyond that?
Yeah, that was a very big concern in my early part of my career when I did, my first probably 5 or 6 years was all in automotive. And I left because I didn't want to get pigeonholed into automotive specifically. I'd seen it happen to too many people, and I didn't want to have a very narrow field of vision when it came to what my options were throughout my career. So I made sure that the next job that I was going to pursue had nothing to do with automotive. And then that got me into the beverage space, actually. So when Gary Vee hired me, he put me in charge of AB InBev as a portfolio, Hasbro, and I think I did some financial services as well with this was GE Capital before it became Synchrony Financial. And that was great. It was small, but a lot of the stuff he gave me had a lot of runway for growth. So AB InBev, for instance, that was probably the one that I really latched onto the most. I took a small team of, probably like 4 or 5 people, and we had one brand, it was Shock Top, and we were doing maybe, I don't know, $500,000 worth of fees. And we turned it into like a $18 million a year portfolio. We were doing digital AOR for like 15 brands, like Budweiser, Bud Light, Stella, Michelob, all the major brands in the portfolio. And at one point between that and a couple of my other portfolios, I was managing or influencing and leading teams of over 100 people. So it was very crazy. You go from strategist to HR employee very quick.
Yes. Well, how did Gary Vaynerchuk find you? What was that experience like? Did you apply for a job there? Did he just see your expertise and talent when, with your other work that you were doing?
No, he didn't actually find me. His brother-in-law, Alex, found me. And I think it was at a time where he was looking to expand. The agency was very young. I was actually employee number 325, and now there's probably over 3,000, and they're all over the world. But at the time, it was this small social media shop in New York, and there was, as I said, probably a little bit over 300 people. But we were predominantly in New York. I think we had a San Francisco agency at the time. And he was looking for something that was very kind of the center of a Venn diagram, hard to find. So he was looking to expand his client service team and bring in some outside talent that had experience, like forensic level knowledge of social media strategy, but also on the other side of the Venn diagram, the other piece was like experience working with CMOs. And if you look at those two things in combination, it probably whittled the field down to maybe 50 people in the world at the time that could say that they had experience doing both of those two things. So most of the people at the time that had experience interfacing with CMOs, these were guys and gals that were at the top of major advertising agencies doing TV ads and media buys and stuff like that. They didn't know anything about social media. And the people that did know something about social media typically didn't have a lot of senior client experience. So I filled a very unique void for them. And when he hired me, I was maybe the second or third outside VP hire that they made.
And what was that experience like compared to your experiences before? Did you find it was a very kind of the agency style, very energetic, young, enthusiastic, willing to take risks, but also add that Venn diagram, right? Having that expert knowledge that you could also bring that brevity and professionalism?
Yeah, it was interesting because I spent time in the client offices. And then when I got to New York, I was working for an agency. It's actually kind of an interesting story. Like I was working at Audi in the DC area. My current wife, my then girlfriend, was living in New York working in fashion. I wanted to move to New York to propose to her. Ooh. So long story short, Scott Keogh, the CMO, definitely influenced my pathway to get to New York by talking to the powers that be at the social media agency that we hired called M80. And they had a New York office. So I actually went up to New York and worked for the social media agency and ran Audi from there for a number of years. But so I got experience working inside of a client office. And then when I went to New York to work for M80, the social agency, they were embedded inside of Group M, which is one of the world's largest media companies. And so like Mediacom, Mindshare, Maxis, all those agencies were in that building, but it was very, nothing against those guys. I love them. I still have friends over there, but very devoid of creativity. And so then I go over to VaynerMedia circa 2014, and the place is exploding from the seams with young, talented, creative people. So it was, it's not like I had never been around creative people. I went to the VCU Brand Center, which is known for creativity. I also worked with Venables Bell and partners. They were in San Francisco. They were creative agents, very creative. Like we did a ton of Super Bowl work together, but it was different going to Vayner. Vayner had a reputation coming in. It was a lot of people in the industry saw it as more of like a cult because you had this leader, this figurehead, and then you had these like minions that followed him. And it was like very much so like what he said was what you went to the clients with. There wasn't a lot of room to kind of color outside of that, but I came in and I wouldn't say that I completely tore that model down, but I definitely figured out a way to kind of have the balance of both worlds where it was, yes, we're taking info from Gary, taking inputs from Gary, but we're also, going to go out and be very consumer centric. So I think I was part of the growing up phase of VaynerMedia.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. Where did you go from there? Because you were there for a little over 5 years.
I was in the New York branch of VaynerMedia for about 6 years. Eventually, I quit drinking alcohol, which was kind of an interesting time frame. So and it wasn't because of alcoholism. It was actually because my doctor told me I was going to get gout if I kept drinking beer. But imagine this. You're running a portfolio of beer brands and you have a massive expense budget. And every time you see your clients, you're expected to take them out for drinks. And you even have a beer fridge on your floor next to your desk. Like all of your employees are drinking like happy hour style, like 2 or 3 times a week. So when I quit drinking, it was really just a lifestyle change. I had young kids at the time. I didn't like being drunk around them. I didn't like being hungover around them. And my doctor said, you're consuming too much yeast. You're going to get gout if you don't stop this.
Gosh.
So I just took it on myself to say, hey, that sounds awful and painful. And if I don't have to have that, I don't want to have that. So let me just knock it out. But it was kind of awkward for that first year because I was still running a massive beer portfolio and the culture was definitely a happy hour centric culture. So I think it wasn't necessarily specifically because of that, but I did express that I was looking for new opportunities to Gary. And then eventually he shipped me off to Los Angeles to help manage the Los Angeles office with a handful of other leaders. And so I spent a little bit of time doing that. Eventually COVID hit and I was out in LA. I think I kind of dodged a bullet. I definitely didn't want to be in New York in hindsight during the pandemic. But during that time frame, I also pivoted into doing some small business work for VaynerX, opening up a branch of the Sasha Group, which was designed for small businesses. And I also spearheaded a lot of Gary's education and training programs, did a lot of virtual work, a lot of subscription-based video products and stuff like that. So we figured out how to make things happen during COVID.
Yeah. And that took you into a whole other realm of actually teaching people how to use the tools, the tactics, the strategies, the vision that you had learned working with these major clients.
Yeah, it was great. I actually ran and managed a bunch of Gary's mastermind courses for a number of years, programmed them, sold tickets, hosted the events in all the different cities, and really got to learn what, small business and solopreneurs and entrepreneurs were looking to do and looking to get from marketing. But that was one of my favorite little stints that I had at VaynerX was figuring out how to work with people with the small businesses because, at that level, your efforts and the strategies that you deploy, on behalf of those companies, it means so much more. You actually see the things that you breathe into existence, make a difference at such a micro level. Whereas sometimes when you're a part of a massive integrated agency mix on a Fortune 500 company, sure, you can see your strategies working in market in terms of are they getting a lot of engagement or are they viral or whatever? But you don't always see your efforts have a direct line to profitability or, revenue growth or something like that because there's 19 other things that are claiming attribution on those, So it's much different when you're working with a company that's making $2 million and they're doing one thing, and that's the one thing you told them to do, and then you see the numbers go up because of that one thing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I have a big heart for small business. I'm on the Intuit Small Business Council. So, and that's the backbone of the United States.
Yeah, I think 99.7% of all companies in the United States are classified as a small business. So we better care about small business.
And then what was the next part of your journey? Because you've been able to take all of this expertise, all of this knowledge, the learning, working with so many different kinds of people, networking, and you completely pivoted in a way.
Yeah, well, I think, after 10 years working with Gary and Vayner, I was looking for something new in general. I have this analogy, it's kind of, all of a sudden you hit your 40s and it's kind of like somebody turns the light on at the nightclub and you don't want to be the guy with the gray beard on at the in the agency world after midnight or whatever. So, that's kind of how I was feeling being around nothing but like 29-year-olds all the time and like it being like a tragically hip environment. I probably could have stuck it out longer if I really wanted to. I love Gary. I love the mission. He's like a brother to me, but I also had a little bit of an itch to do my own thing. I had been working remote now for, I think, 3 or 4 years at that point. So I felt this kind of level of like autonomy and I really wanted to get back to like doing things that were values based. I consider myself a Christian. I'm a big believer in giving back to society at all costs. And I think there's a lot of things out there that are maybe misrepresented in the media and the press, one of those things being cannabis. I'm not a massive consumer of cannabis. I believe in it from a plant medicine perspective. I'm also kind of like a skeptic when it comes to big pharma and big medicine and all that kind of stuff. So I look at things like, mental health. I have 4 kids, so I'm always thinking about what are our phones, what are social media doing to the kids these days? Right. I think I read somewhere where like 1 in 4 members of Gen Z is on some sort of an antidepressant. And that's incredibly sad to me. And I started thinking to myself, when my kids, I have 4 kids, so like the chances are one of them is going to have some depression. So what would I rather put in their hands? A joint or a gummy or some sort of a medicine regimen that they're going to be stuck on for a long time. And for me, it's the cannabis. And it's weird, like, I don't know exactly what got me to feel this way about cannabis. I think it was because when I stopped drinking alcohol, I started analyzing the behavior a little bit more. I started noticing a lot of trends converging in society. And I started paying attention more to the fact that alcohol is really not that good for you. But it gets a pass because like the entertainment industry, the government, the lobbyists and all that kind of stuff, they want it to have a pass in society. And then I look at cannabis and it's the exact opposite. There's actually some medicinal purpose to it. There's actually healing properties that can calm anxiety and stress and depression and PTSD and, sleep, insomnia and stuff like that, chronic pain. But it only gets pigeonholed as this like, gateway drug to heroin addiction. Like that's not at all like the full extent of what cannabis is. And it's such a shame that this one thing gets bastardized while this other thing gets glorified. And so I wouldn't say I made it my life's mission, but I'd say I'm definitely down a pathway right now. I'm actually launching brands. I'm working with brands that are in the cannabis space. So it's definitely a bigger part of my life. And that was part of the impetus. Me and a buddy of mine from like elementary school, essentially, we both had this same epiphany at the same time. We were like, well, we're both quitting alcohol. We both see a lot of potential in cannabis applications, specifically in the drinks world. I think we were sitting at a bar one day in like 2020 or 2019. It's definitely 2019. It was pre-pandemic. It was 2019. And we found out that like Lagunitas was launching a hop-infused beer that was non-alcoholic, but it also got you high. Oh. And I just thought, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. That's awesome. You don't get drunk, so you're not like sloppy. You don't have a hangover, so you don't have to worry about that, and it's also, they were like 70 calories or something like that. So it tastes good, tastes like an IPA, but it's not incredibly heavy. And I was like, imagine if you can manipulate that, what else can you manipulate? So one of the things that me and him came up with was the idea of manipulating seltzer beverages with cannabis. Okay. And that's where the name Fuzzy came from originally. But so that was one of the things that pulled me away from Vayner, was like working on side projects with my buddy JM and trying to launch things into the market from a cannabis perspective. So that was kind of the original impetus, was like, this is becoming more real than, just a side hustle. So let me get out of Vayner and go do that. But it wasn't quite enough to like, pay back my full salary and like keep the roof over my head and all that kind of stuff. So I created my own consultancy called Quattrone Brands. And that's, kind of like my hub essentially for, fractional CMO contracts. I would count Fuzzy as one of those, but I'm working with a brand called American Weed, which is like the Budweiser or the Nike of cannabis. It's just a big, cool brand that has very big aspirations.
I resonate with what you're saying so deeply. I'm also in my 40s. I also decided not to drink just because I don't really drink a lot and it doesn't really do that much. And why I just don't need it. But I have found, I've worked with companies, CBD infused more than the other side, but found a lot of helpful products for all ages of people. There are people who are going through cancer treatments that get a lot of help. I have trouble sleeping sometimes. If I eat a gummy, can fall asleep. The drinks that you're talking about, right? There's other ones out the market that are pretty good. I think there are so many uses, and it's something that's going to make you more relaxed and mellow, not something where alcohol can have a lot of different effects depending on your chemistry. It can.
Oh yeah, for sure. So, we for one of the brands I work with, American Weed Co., think about them like the Budweiser or the Nike of cannabis, essentially, like a brand that does big, cool activations and like has a really good aesthetic to them and stuff like that. We sponsored Cali Vibes Music Festival out in Long Beach, and I was out there in February in Southern California, and it's crazy. I've been doing festivals for the past like 15 years because of all the work I did in beer. But you go to a festival that's like openly more of a weed festival, and like there are no fights. There's no cops. There's no fire. No fire department called. There's no ambulances. Where you get all of that at like alcohol fueled festivals. In fact, you go to like a cannabis festival, like Cali Vibes. You go to the bar where you would typically, you get these massive outdoor bars,
right?
You just walk right up and get a drink if you want. You go to any other festivals, and it might be a line like there might be like 10 lines that are 9 people deep. So it's kind of nice. Everybody's chill and there's no conflict. It's awesome.
So, okay, Fuzzy is a cannabis product, or it's not a cannabis product?
It was, and it might again someday be, but we had some supply chain issues along the way from when we got started till now. And that actually was kind of a blessing in disguise. We wound up putting in a number of different patents when we came up with the name Fuzzy, including patents on like things that were just out of this world that nobody had ever heard of, like sparkling coffee. And those actually came to fruition, and we got approved for the patent on sparkling coffee. And when our supply chain issues were happening with the THC side on Fuzzy, we decided, with the help of our investors, to pivot into the coffee market versus going into the cannabis drinks market, which, it's unfortunate in a little bit of ways. I still have a lot of passion and heart for bringing out cannabis products, but in this particular way, it allows us to get to market much faster because there's not as much red tape in the coffee world as there is obviously with cannabis, because coffee is federally legal. And so that's what we're doing right now. The products we actually just redesigned not redesigned, but we finished our can packaging and our design for the packaging very recently. We just went through formulation and did our first batch of cans. And so the product should be hitting the market later this summer.
Wow, that's fast.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd say you'd say fast. The idea has been in the works for about 4 years. So.
Right. Yeah. So I think when you think about launching, right, everybody thinks it's going to be really fast, but I think 4 years is quite quick, particularly when you have patented processes, methods. You have to test and iterate and make sure it's really fine tuned. And I know also the process to get into different regions for your brand and different kinds of stores can also be, quite a time suck.
Yeah, well, we're hopeful that with our branding, it's definitely Gen Z forward, the big chunky fonts and like the cartoon characters on it and stuff like that. So we're hopeful that like hitting the brand in a certain type of way, and our positioning as being like very bubbly forward, like you don't typically see coffee beverages that are bubble forward, So we're hopeful that makes a difference with young folks that are trying to be somewhere between like an energy drink and a iced coffee beverage in a can.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's fascinating, and I think you'll have a lot of success with that.
Thanks.
I also want to know, so what are some of the other companies that you're working with right now? And with the cannabis market, you are in the Nashville area now?
Yes, I am in the Nashville. Not because of cannabis. This is actually probably the worst place to be if you're in cannabis.
Is it legal there? Because I know it's in California.
It's not in the same way that it is in California. There is the ability to buy hemp-derived products here because of the Farm Bill. So the Farm Bill that was passed in 2018, there's been a bunch of companies that have come in and created loopholes where you can actually harvest, CBD buds from the hemp plant, and like it's very scientific, but essentially like hemp versus the THC buds. When it's a hemp bud, it has to be lit on fire in order for it to give you a psychoactive effect. So like that's why you can create stuff that seems like, typical THC weed, but it's not exactly the same thing. Like when you hear words like Delta 9 or Delta 8, like that's kind of the world we're talking about in Tennessee. Whereas in California, you can have like the headiest nugs known to man. You can harvest all of the THC you want and put it in a package. So, I mean, other brands, to kind of get back to your point, the other cannabis brand I'm working with is a brand called Mana Supply Co. They're primarily a retailer on the East Coast, but they also have manufacturing in the Midwest and Missouri. So they're kind of a hot in pursuit of, becoming vertically integrated, meaning like growing their own product, harvesting it, packaging it, selling it, and also like building brands out as they go. So that's a pretty cool experience, kind of getting to learn the whole entire supply chain from like seed to sale. And then the American Weed is more like in that middle tier. It's just a brand. Like we don't have retail outfits. We don't have manufacturing. We're just a brand. So like they feel a lot different. On that American Weed side, it's more about, speeding through like a scale operation, trying to get to a certain size, trying to get to certain states by a certain period of time, and doing big, bold work. Whereas on the Mana Supply Co side, it's definitely, we're exploring a lot of different pathways to growth and profitability in different angles of the cannabis industry. And then outside of that, I do some consulting work. I've worked with Christian artists. Like I worked with a guy named Zonti, who's an up and coming hip hop artist that just recently crossed over and got signed by Atlantic Records. I'm starting to scale out Quattrone brands a little bit and bring on some people, some consultants, and do more work. I'm working with Fuzzy. That's more of like a passion project of mine. It's more, I'm a founding partner in that one. So it's less about getting retainer dollars and it's more about putting my own brand in the market kind of thing. So I'm keeping busy. I'm doing a lot of different things.
As we do, is there any conflict ever between the Christian artists and other clients like that you work with and the cannabis world, or them finding out?
Not really. I'm pretty open book. They all know about it. The cannabis clients all know each other. They serve on lobbying groups together. There's a group called the National Cannabis Roundtable, which is the biggest lobby in cannabis, and the CEOs of both companies are friends. So I actually got referred to one by the other. And so that's kind of nice and neat. And then, Zonti, he knows me. I'm not a huge cannabis consumer. I'll do a gummy here and there, but I don't smoke anything. So I'm not like this like weed head or anything like that. Yeah. I don't even promote overconsumption. I don't care about the psychedelic side of cannabis. Ooh. I'm more of a therapeutics guy. So like when I think about cannabis, I think about microdosing. I think about, how it can help me, my wife, my kids, I think about topicals. I think about, ingestibles. That's kind of the world of cannabis that I like, love, want to play in, want to be in. And I think that sensibility, like the idea of, I like the idea of temperance. I like the idea of always having my wits about me, being in control, like that kind of stuff. I think addiction is a really hard place for people to be. And I don't want to be the guy that's selling people things that get you addicted. I've done that before. I've sold luxury vehicles. I've sold, so I've sold things that make people more greedy. I've sold people things that make people more materialistic. I've sold alcohol. I'm not proud of that. Like if looking back on it, if I had the same sensibilities that I have now, I would have never agreed to promote alcohol like 10 years ago.
I think that's the epiphany that so many people come to, particularly when they work for somebody else. They work in the agency world. They get a lot of monetary success, but they're not living with their values. And so that's something I always think about and try to impart on people is, understand who you are as a brand, your personal value statement. What is your purpose here? How do you want to help people? And it can be hard to say no to certain opportunities that may present themselves, but it can also leave room for the right opportunities to come, and you'll end up being more successful, perhaps ending up with more money, just feeling better about how you're living life.
Yeah, if you think about it, if you zoom out 30,000 feet, you look at my career, you could say, I am living my 16-year-old's, best dream. Like I got to work on cars, beer, and weed, right? Like high school and college Joe would have been like, holy crap, that's your career? That's awesome, right? But, 45-year-old Joe is looking at it like this, like, when I'm on my deathbed, I can say that I helped revolutionize the world because of the legalization of cannabis. And I was one of the pioneers of something that helped people the most,
Wow. That's so big.
Or how many people can we, I don't know how many people can we save from dying, but how many people that are dying can we actually ease their pain while they're going through a really rough spot? How many fathers can feel, less pain when they're dealing with their kids for the last, 5 years of life if they're dealing with cancer? How many athletes can we help rest in between games? Like, that's the way I see it. How can we take the stigma away from cannabis use and make it something that's everyday use and probably better? Like, if there's no stigma around tobacco, why the hell is there a stigma around cannabis?
Yeah. Yeah. What does the day-to-day look like? Because you have your hands in so many different projects. And if somebody aspires to be a CMO one day, what should they know how to do, or what steps should they take now to get to where you are?
Well, I don't necessarily advise anybody to try to get to where I am. I've made a career of looking 10 years, 15 years down the road and trying to get to where I think the world's going to be then. So I'd say if somebody's starting out now and they have CMO as a goal 10 years from now or whatever, or 15 years from now, you better really understand AI. I'll tell you that much right now. You've got to know how to use ChatGPT because it's going to gut like half of the jobs in the industry. And that's fine. I mean, well, it's not fine. I don't really want to, come across as like cold and callous. It's fine in the sense that the technology is so powerful that it will make you a better marketer if you know how to use it. Mm-hmm. But if you don't sit down and apply yourself to it, then you're never going to learn it and you're going to get lapped by other people. I'm very proficient at using ChatGPT, but only because I've been in social media for almost 20 years. Mm-hmm. In the early parts of my career, there were no creative social media people.
Right.
There were no analysts. There were no media buyers. There were no nothing. It was social media managers and you did everything. And part of that was understanding how to do search queries using Boolean syntax. And Boolean syntax was one of the languages that kind of stuck with me the most. And when I found ChatGPT, I knew how to use it right away because I was like, okay, the way that this thing is actually wanting me to use it is very similar to this thing I used to do 15 years ago. And what I mean by that is most people today, in today's day and age in marketing, they think about things that they're working on, documents, as these like very canvas-oriented environments like Canva or PowerPoint or word processors, Microsoft Word, Google Docs, whatever. It's something that you're constantly refining. In the words of long language text and AI algorithms, it's nothing like that. It's all about using big query data and constantly refining that query, but you're also synthesizing big blocks of data that come as outputs. And you're constantly just, you're always reframing the query to get a better output versus tinkering around with this canvas that you have as like this object. So I would say go out and learn AI as much as you can, because that's going to make you a far better CMO than, spending your time trying to figure out how to be like me. Being like me is pretty easy. My day job is I've got 4 kids and a wife, and I tend to them early in the mornings. I go to the gym, I go to my office, and I work for as many hours as I humanly can until they need me to come back home. Wow. And I balance between the two. And nice. It's not easy. We also have a lot of after school activities. We've got a lot of stuff that we have to kind of go through, but it's worthwhile to me. I think like where I'm at now, I wouldn't change for anything. I love being my own business, like my own CEO. I love running my own company. I love all the different, cookie jars that I've got my hands in. So I'd say if I did have some advice for people, I would say consider whether or not W-2 employment is going to be right for you and figure that out earlier. I think I waited till I was in my mid-40s, probably a hair too long. I think once I got out and I realized, hey, I should have been like, just the advantages that you get, the freedom of your time and how you plan your life and, the tax advantages and all that kind of stuff. Like I always kind of knew how to make money. I know how to recruit clients. I know how to close clients. I know how to do strategy. I know how to do all the things. It was really just, do I do it for myself or do I do it for somebody else? And now I'm doing it for myself and, it's working out.
Awesome. I really appreciate that you talked about your family and balance. I think it can be very hard to balance. My daughter we're going through the college tour process right now. And so that is very time intensive, but it's also my priority is to spend time with her and to be there and to be able to enjoy, whether it's just we're sitting at home, taking her to activities, or we're doing these tours, because we don't get that time back. And work will still be there the next day.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like when we're on our deathbeds, we're not going to sit around thinking about some random companies we worked for when we were in our 40s. It's going to be the kids. It's going to be the wife or the husband or whoever. And so, I don't live this life for my job or for my companies that I work for, the LLC or the S Corp or anything like that. I live my life for them. I get to do this cool thing with these cool companies, and I feel incredibly blessed. But at the end of the day, like, I'm doing it for them. Yeah. So, I got to be mindful of that. I can't work myself to the bone and never see them. It has to be a balance of those things. And, it just kind of helps focus you, especially when you're like dealing with some trauma or some anxiety at work, or you lose a client, or something happens and it's not the most positive thing in the world. I always think about them as a pick me up, like they always pick me up for my down days. And when I'm on a high at work, like I can't get too out of this world, like, high on my own supply. I need to think about the ramifications. I need to plan their, so I'm a very medium, even keel guy. Like everything is in the center for me. I'm not extremely emotional roller coaster all the time. And I think it's because I've got them really anchoring me into this present moment.
Fantastic. So Joe, I always ask if people have a favorite quote, mantra, verse, family motto, words that help get you through every day.
Yeah, I mean, I got two. I can go spiritual route. I'd say 2 Corinthians 5-7, we shall live by faith, not by sight, is kind of the spiritual mantra of my business. It's just, I like to think about Jesus as my shotgun chief operating officer. When I take risks, I do it based on that faith, knowing that God's going to come through for me all the time. And I want to take those leaps and show the faith as if I know that somebody's looking out for me, because I do know that, right? If I'm going to be illustrating my faith, I have to actually walk in faith. So that's on the spiritual side, I'd say that. And then your California-based audience is probably not going to like the second one because it's a Ronald Reagan quote, but I like it. It has nothing to do with politics or my politics, but it was essentially why wait around and make others do things for you when you can go out and do it for yourself sooner? Wow. So it's more of one of those quotes where it's don't wait around, don't be a victim, just go out and make stuff happen, right? And that's something that's kind of always followed me through my life, is just this can-do attitude. I don't really care what people think about me. I used to at one point in my life, but when I really turned a corner early in my life, it was because I stopped caring what other people thought about me. I stopped, cursing the world or cursing God for not getting me the life that I felt like I needed or deserved. Part of that was very egocentric. And once I stopped, really expecting too much out of life or other people, things started really picking up for me. And yeah.
That's so fantastic and inspiring. So thank you for sharing. Joe Quattrone, where should people go to find you? Your website, LinkedIn?
Yeah, you can go to my website if you want to go to quattronebrands.org, or you can go check me out on LinkedIn. That's probably the social network that I, partake in the most. It's, my handle is Super Quattrone across all social media. So Super and then Quattrone. Most people think I was obsessed with comic books, and I'm not. The reason I came out with that name was because I was working at Home Depot when I was in college and grad school, and it was like a super center, and I always thought that I was going to have something to do with super centers, which never actually wound up panning out. So it's so random, but it stuck, and I kept it, and whatever.
It's catchy and easy to remember. So thank you for offering all of your insights, sharing your story and your journey with the audience today. And thank you to everybody who's watching or listening to this episode. I'll be back again with another amazing guest very soon to brighten your day and help you learn some tips and tricks that will make your business a little bit better. Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbrandamplified.com.